She was forced into a marriage until the Mafia boss stopped it and said, "Marry me instead." The crystal chandelier hanging above the dining table cast a fractured, shimmering light over the plates of uneaten food. It was a cold light, devoid of warmth, much like the atmosphere in the Monroe dining room. Emily Monroe sat with her spine pressed against the high back of her velvet chair. Her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. At 23 years old, she had learned that silence was often the only shield she had in this house. But tonight, the silence felt heavy. It felt calm before devastation. Her father, Richard Monroe, stood at the head of the table. He held a champagne flute aloft, his hand trembling ever so slightly. The tremor was small, barely imperceptible to anyone who did not know him. But Emily knew him. She saw the sweat beading at his temple despite the cool air conditioning. She saw the way his eyes darted toward the man sitting across from Emily, seeking approval like a dog waiting for a command. Across the table sat Alexander Voss. Alexander did not look at her father. He looked at Emily. His gaze was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. He was a handsome man in a clinical, sharp-edged way, with hair slicked back perfectly and a suit that cost more than most families earned in a year. But his eyes were devoid of light. They were flat, gray surfaces that reflected nothing. Richard cleared his throat, the sound distinct and jarring in the quiet room. "I have an announcement to make," Richard said, his voice straining for a joviality that did not exist. Emily's stomach turned. She looked at her mother, but the older woman was staring resolutely at the floral centerpiece, refusing to meet her daughter's eyes. That was the first sign of danger. Her mother only studied the flowers when she was terrified. "We have come to an agreement," Richard continued, gesturing grandly with his glass. "A union that will strengthen our family and secure our future. It is my distinct honor to announce the engagement of my daughter, Emily, to Mr. Alexander Voss." The air left the room. Emily felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her cold and dizzy. She stared at her father, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to laugh and say it was a business merger, not a marriage. But Richard simply downed his champagne in one nervous gulp. Alexander stood up. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark in deep water. He walked around the long table, his footsteps silent on the plush rug, until he stood beside her chair. Emily could smell him. Expensive cologne, starch, and something metallic. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a velvet box. "Give me your hand." "Emily," Alexander said. It was not a request. She froze. Her limbs felt like lead. She wanted to scream, to flip the table, to run out the front door and never look back. But years of conditioning, years of being the perfect daughter, held her in place. Slowly, mechanically, she lifted her left hand. Alexander slid the ring onto her finger. It was enormous, a diamond that should have been beautiful. But on her hand, it felt like a shackle. It was heavy, cold. "Welcome to the family," he whispered, his lips brushing her ear. Emily pulled back, her skin crawling. She looked at her father again, finding her voice. "Father," she said, the word barely a whisper. "I do not understand. We will discuss it later," Richard said sharply, finally looking at her with a mix of pity and desperation. "Smile. Emily, this is a celebration." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of nausea and polite terror. When Alexander finally left, kissing her hand with that same terrifying lack of emotion, Emily did not go to her room. She marched straight to her father's study. She found him pouring a glass of brandy, his hand shaking violently now. "Explain this," she demanded, closing the heavy oak door behind her. "You cannot just sell me off to a man I barely know. Alexander Voss he is terrifying. Father, there are rumors about him. People say he hurts women. Rumors are just gossip," Richard snapped, though he did not turn to face her. "He's a powerful businessman. He can provide for you." "I can provide for myself," Emily argued, stepping closer. "I have my degree. I have plans. I do not want to be a trophy wife to a man who looks at me like I am a piece of property. You have no choice," Richard yelled, spinning around. The glass in his hand splashed amber liquid onto the carpet. The outburst silenced her. Her father was a weak man, but he was rarely a loud one. His face was pale, his eyes wide with genuine fear. "It is not just about a merger." "Emily," he said, his voice dropping to a ragged whisper. He sank into his leather chair, looking suddenly old and frail. "I made mistakes, bad investments. I borrowed money to cover the losses, thinking I could turn it around. I was wrong." "Who did you borrow from?" Emily asked, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. "The Voss family," Richard admitted, covering his face with his hands. "Not the bank. The family. I owe them $5 million. Emily, they were going to take everything, the house, the assets. They were going to hurt us." Emily stared at him, the room spinning. $5 million. It was an insurmountable sum. Alexander offered a solution. Richard whispered, "He said he has been watching you. He said he wanted a wife of high standing. If you marry him, the debt is forgiven. You save us. Emily, you save this family." He was not asking her to marry for status. He was asking her to pay. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice trembling. Richard looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "Then we are dead." The realization settled over her like a shroud. She was not a bride. She was collateral. The next day, the walls of the manor felt like they were closing in on her. Every servant who looked at her seemed to know she had been sold. Her mother was busy planning an engagement party for that very evening, fluttering about with lists of guests and flowers, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she was decorating a funeral. Emily could not breathe. Late in the afternoon, she grabbed her purse and car keys, ignoring the protests of the housekeeper. She needed air. She needed to be somewhere where nobody knew her name, where she was not Emily Monroe, the currency in a business deal. She drove without direction for an hour, the city landscape changing from the manicured lawns of the suburbs to the gritty, gray concrete of the industrial district. She ended up in a part of the city she usually avoided, a neighborhood known for shadows and secrets. She parked her car and walked until she found a place that looked open. It was a bar called the Obsidian. The exterior was unassuming, just a black door with a small gold sign. But when she stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. It was an upscale establishment hidden in the rough, a sanctuary for those who had money but did not want the attention of the high society limelight. The lighting was dim, amber hues casting long shadows against dark mahogany walls. Jazz played softly from a speaker system that sounded like a live band. The air smelled of expensive cigars and aged whiskey. Emily sat at the far end of the bar, away from the few other patrons. She ordered a gin and tonic, her hands still shaking. "Rough day?" The voice was deep, smooth, and carried a texture like velvet dragged over gravel. Emily turned. Sitting 2 stools away was a man. He was watching her, his body angled slightly in her direction. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp cheekbones and a jawline that looked as if it had been carved from granite. His hair was dark, styled with a casual precision, and his suit was black, tailored to fit broad shoulders and a lean, powerful frame. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were dark, intelligent, and watchful. They were not cold like Alexander's eyes. They were burning with a quiet intensity. "You could say that," Emily replied, turning back to her drink. She took a long sip, the alcohol burning her throat in a way that felt grounding. "I usually do not see people wearing diamonds that size in this part of town," the man said. He gestured vaguely to her left hand, where Alexander's ring caught the dim light. "It looks heavy." Emily looked down at the ring. She hated it. "It is," she murmured. "Heavier than you can imagine." The man picked up his glass, a tumbler of dark amber liquid, neat. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving her profile. "A ring like that usually means a celebration, but you look like you are sitting at a wake." Emily let out a short, bitter laugh. "Is the difference always so obvious? In my line of work, reading people is a survival skill," he said. He slid 1 seat closer, his movement fluid and controlled. "I am Vincent." Emily hesitated. She should not give her name. She should drink her gin and leave. But there was something about him, a magnetic pull that made the air between them feel charged. "Emily," she said. "Pleasure." Emily. Vincent rested his forearms on the bar. He did not crowd her, yet his presence was encompassing. So, who is the lucky man who managed to make his fiancée look this miserable? Emily traced the rim of her glass. It is complicated. It is an arrangement. Ah, Vincent said, a knowing look crossing his face. Old money. Mergers and acquisitions. Love as a business transaction, something like that, she said. His name is Alexander Voss. The change in the air was instantaneous. Vincent did not move. He did not flinch, but the temperature around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. The playful curiosity in his eyes vanished, replaced by a hard, lethal sharpness. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. Voss, Vincent repeated. The name sounded like a curse on his tongue. Do you know him? Emily asked, sensing the shift. A shiver ran down her spine. But it was not from fear of Vincent. It was the realization that Alexander's shadow reached even here. I know of him, Vincent corrected, though his tone suggested he knew much more. He's a man with a reputation, and not the kind of reputation that makes for a happy husband. He is difficult, Emily said carefully. He's a viper, Vincent said flatly. He turned his body fully toward her now, his intensity dialing up. Listen to me, Emily. A man like Voss does not view marriage as a partnership. He views it as ownership. If you are marrying him, you need to be very careful. Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The kindness, the warning, the raw honesty from a stranger. It almost broke her composure. I do not have a choice, she whispered. My family. We owe him. Vincent studied her face, his gaze searching. He looked at the ring again, then back to her eyes. He seemed to be calculating something, weighing variables in a game she did not understand. There is always a choice, Vincent said softly. Sometimes the price is just higher than we want to pay. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the bar top. He did not touch her, but the proximity sent a jolt of electricity through her arm. If you ever decide that the price of staying is too high, he said, his voice low, almost intimate. Remember that vipers can be crushed. Emily stared at him, her heart pounding against her ribs. For a moment she saw something in his eyes, a promise of violence. Yes, but also a promise of protection. It was a dangerous look. It was the look of a man who burned the world down to get what he wanted. She pulled her hand back, breaking the spell. I have to go, she said breathlessly. I have an engagement party to attend. She stood up, her legs shaking. She threw cash on the counter, more than the drink cost, and turned to leave. Emily, Vincent called out. She paused at the door, looking back. Vincent raised his glass to her. A salute, a warning. Be careful tonight. She fled into the cool evening air, her heart racing. She told herself it was just the stress. She told herself it was the alcohol. But deep down, she knew it was him. She had felt safer in 5 minutes with a stranger in a dark bar than she had ever felt in her entire life. The engagement party was a masquerade of wealth and hypocrisy. The ballroom of the Monroe estate was filled with the city's elite. Politicians, bankers, socialites. They drank vintage champagne and ate caviar, whispering behind their hands about how lucky Emily was. Emily stood on a raised platform, Alexander's hand clamping the back of her neck like a vice. He smiled for the cameras, a cold, perfect smile. She is the jewel of my life, Alexander told a reporter, pulling Emily closer until she could feel the gun he wore holstered beneath his tuxedo jacket. Emily forced a smile. It felt like her face was cracking. Far above the crowd, on the mezzanine level where the shadows clung to the corners, a man stood watching. Vincent Moretti leaned against the marble railing, his hands in his pockets. He had bypassed security with a single phone call and a nod from the head of the detail, a man who knew better than to stop a Moretti. Vincent watched the way Voss held her. He saw the tension in Emily's shoulders. He saw the terror behind her smile that no one else seemed to notice. He remembered the way she had looked in the bar, fragile but defiant. He remembered the spark in her eyes when she challenged him. Voss was going to break her. He would crush that spark until there was nothing left but an obedient doll. Vincent felt a dark, familiar rage coil in his gut. He had spent years building his empire, keeping his emotions locked behind walls of discipline and violence. He did not save strays. He did not get involved in civilians' messes. But as he watched Alexander Voss whisper something into Emily's ear that made her flinch, Vincent made a decision. He took out his phone and typed a message to his second-in-command. Find out everything about the debt Richard Monroe owes to the Voss family, and get a team ready. He put the phone away and looked down at Emily one last time. Not her, he murmured to the empty air. You do not get to keep her. Vincent turned and walked away, his footsteps silent, disappearing into the night like a ghost who had just found a reason to haunt the living. The weeks that followed the engagement party were not filled with the joy of a bride-to-be, but with the rigorous, suffocating discipline of a soldier preparing for a war she had already lost. Alexander called it refining. Emily called it erasure. Every aspect of her life was now under his direct supervision. Her schedule was dictated by his assistant, a severe woman who looked at Emily with disdain. Her mornings began at 5 o'clock with a personal trainer Alexander had hired, a man who did not speak, only pointed and counted. Her diet was restricted to leafy greens, lean proteins, and measured portions that left a hollow ache in the center of her stomach. We need you perfect for the cameras, darling, Alexander had said over a dinner where he ate steak and she picked at a salad without dressing. Image is currency, and right now, you are my most valuable asset. He did not say it with affection. He said it with the possessiveness of a collector smoothing a wrinkle out of a rare painting. He began choosing her clothes, discarding her soft cardigans and floral dresses in favor of structured, sharp-edged designer pieces in black, navy, and slate gray. He wanted her to look like him, cold, expensive, and untouchable. The pressure was physical, a weight pressing down on her chest that made it hard to draw a full breath. But the worst part was the isolation. Her phone was monitored. Her outings were chaperoned. She was a prisoner in the open air, paraded around the city as a symbol of the Voss Empire's growing power. The breaking point came 3 weeks into the engagement. Emily stood on a podium in an exclusive bridal boutique in the fashion district. The walls were lined with mirrors, reflecting her pale, exhausted face from every angle. The dressmaker, a frantic woman with pins in her mouth, was tightening the laces of a corset that already felt like it was crushing Emily's ribs. Tighter, her mother. Eleanor commanded from the velvet sofa. She was sipping champagne, critical eyes scanning Emily's silhouette. There is still a bit of a slouch in her posture. Alexander wants regal, not relaxed. Mother, I cannot breathe, Emily gasped, her hands gripping the silk skirts. The room was too warm. The smell of lavender perfume and fabric starch was cloying. Nonsense, Eleanor snapped. Beauty is pain. Emily, you are marrying one of the most powerful men in the city. You will look the part. The dressmaker pulled the laces again. The world tilted. Black spots danced in Emily's vision, swarming like gnats. The sound of her mother's voice became distant, as if she were speaking from underwater. The heat in the room spiked, then vanished, leaving her freezing cold. Her knees buckled. She tried to reach out for the mirror to steady herself, but her hand grasped only air. She hit the floor with a soft thud, the layers of silk billowing around her like a collapsing cloud. For a moment, there was darkness. Then, consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by the sharp scent of smelling salts. Emily blinked, finding herself lying on the floor, the dressmaker hovering anxiously with a glass of water. Oh dear, the dressmaker muttered. Emily looked past her, seeking comfort, seeking her mother. Eleanor was standing up, but she was not rushing to Emily's side. She was inspecting the hem of the dress where Emily had fallen. Get her up, Eleanor said, her voice crisp and devoid of maternal warmth. And be careful with the lace. If she has torn it, that will take weeks to repair. Emily felt a crack in her heart, wider and deeper than the hunger pangs in her stomach. Her mother did not care that she had fainted. Her mother cared about the merchandise. "I need to eat," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, you can have an apple when we get home," Eleanor replied, checking her watch. "Stand up. Emily, we are behind schedule." 2 days later, Emily managed to slip her leash. Alexander was out of the city on business, and his security detail had grown lax, assuming the broken-down girl was too frightened to run. She told the driver to drop her off at the library, a place Alexander deemed acceptable for a woman of her station. But the moment the town car pulled away, she walked 3 blocks to a small, nondescript coffee shop tucked away in an alley. She just wanted coffee with sugar and a pastry. She wanted to taste something sweet. She wanted to sit in a corner and pretend, for 20 minutes, that she belonged to herself. She bought a blueberry muffin and a latte, sitting at a small wooden table near the back. She took a bite of the muffin, closing her eyes as the sugar hit her system, a fleeting moment of bliss. "You look like you have not eaten in a week." Emily's eyes snapped open. Vincent Moretti sat in the chair opposite her. She had not heard him approach. He was wearing a leather jacket over a dark t-shirt today, looking less corporate and more like the dangerous street soldier rumors claimed he was. His eyes were dark, scanning her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Vincent," she breathed, glancing toward the door in panic. "You cannot be here. If someone sees us—" "My men are outside," he said calmly. "If any of Voss's watchdogs come within a block, I will know." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "You look pale, Emily, and thin." "I am fine," she lied, putting the muffin down. Her appetite had suddenly vanished, replaced by nervous energy. "I'm just preparing for the wedding." "Is that what they call it?" Vincent asked, his voice low and laced with anger. "Starvation, control." "Why are you here?" Emily asked, keeping her voice hushed. "Why do you keep appearing?" "Because you are walking into a fire, and you do not seem to realize how hot it burns," Vincent said. His expression hardened. "I did some digging on your fiancé." Emily stiffened. "I do not want to hear this." "You need to hear this," Vincent countered, his voice dropping an octave, commanding her attention. 3 years ago, Alexander was engaged to a woman named Elena Rostova, daughter of a shipping magnate. Beautiful, educated, spirited. Just like you. Emily stared at him, her hands clenching in her lap. "I have never heard of her." "Exactly," Vincent said darkly. "The engagement lasted 4 months. Elena started showing up to events with bruises she tried to cover with makeup. Then, she stopped showing up entirely. The official story was that she broke off the engagement and moved to Europe to study art." He paused, letting the silence stretch between them. "She never entered Europe. Emily. Her passport was never used. Her bank accounts were never touched. She vanished." A chill ran through Emily's body, colder than the winter wind outside. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that men like Alexander Voss do not let things go," Vincent said. "They destroy them. Elena tried to leave him. I do not think she made it out." "You are lying," Emily whispered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her doubt. "You are a criminal. Why should I trust you over a respected businessman?" Vincent's eyes softened. "Just a fraction. Because I am a criminal who admits what he is. Voss hides his monster behind a suit. That makes him far more dangerous." He reached into his jacket pocket and slid a small piece of paper across the table. It had a phone number on it. Nothing else. "If you find proof," Vincent said, standing up, "if you realize I am right, call me." He turned and walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone with a half-eaten muffin and a terrifying seed of doubt planted in her chest. That night, the doubt bloomed into panic. She was at Alexander's penthouse, waiting for him to return from his trip. The apartment was a testament to his ego. Cold marble floors, steel furniture, abstract art that looked like violent slashes of paint on canvas. She sat in his home office, a room she was forbidden to enter. The door was usually locked, but the cleaning staff had left it slightly ajar. Vincent's words echoed in her mind. She vanished. Emily stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She shouldn't, if he caught her. But she had to know. She slipped into the office, closing the door softly behind her. The room smelled of leather and expensive scotch. She went behind the massive mahogany desk. The drawers were locked. She looked around frantically. Alexander was meticulous, but he was also arrogant. He believed no one would dare challenge him. She checked the underside of the desktop, her fingers brushing against a small, taped key. Her breath hitched. She peeled the key off and inserted it into the bottom drawer. It clicked open. Emily pulled the drawer out, her hands shaking so badly the wood rattled. Inside, there was no neatly filed paperwork. First, she saw the gun. It was a sleek, silver pistol. Loaded, beside it lay a silencer. It was not a weapon for self-defense. It was a weapon for silence. Next to the gun was a thick manila envelope. Emily opened it, and photos spilled out onto the desk. She gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. They were photos of her. Emily walked her dog 3 months ago. Emily at the grocery store. Emily is sleeping in her bedroom at her parents' house, taken through the window with a long-range lens. He'd been watching her long before the debt was called in. This was not a business arrangement. This was an obsession. She shoved the photos back, her heart racing so fast she felt dizzy. Under the envelope was a small orange prescription bottle. The label bore her name, Emily Monroe. She picked it up. The date on the bottle was from yesterday. The contents were heavy sedatives. She'd never been prescribed these. "To keep me compliant," she whispered to the empty room, horror washing over her. He was planning to drug her, to turn her into a doll that couldn't fight back, couldn't run, couldn't think. She shoved everything back into the drawer, locking it with trembling fingers and retaping the key. She backed out of the room, feeling unclean, feeling hunted. Vincent was right. Oh God, Vincent was right. 2 days later, the charity ball was held at the city's grandest hotel. Emily wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, chosen by Alexander. It was beautiful, but the neckline was high, the sleeves long, covering her up, hiding her away even as he displayed her. Alexander held her arm firmly as they navigated the ballroom. He accepted congratulations with a shark-like grin, his grip on her tightening every time she tried to pull away slightly. "You are trembling, my dear," he murmured, his voice low and menacing. "Stop it. You look guilty." "I'm just cold," Emily lied, staring straight ahead. "Go warm up then," he said, releasing her abruptly near the bar. "I have business to discuss with the senator. Do not wander far." The moment his back was turned, Emily bolted. She did not go to the ladies' room. She found the service elevator and pressed the button for the roof. She needed air. She needed to escape the perfume, the lies, the suffocating weight of Alexander's presence. The rooftop was windy and cold. The city lights spread out below like a glittering ocean of indifference. Emily walked to the edge, gripping the stone railing. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes. She felt trapped. If she ran, her father would be ruined, perhaps killed. If she stayed, she would become a prisoner in her own mind, drugged and controlled until she vanished like Elena. "It is a long way down." Emily spun around. Vincent stepped out from the shadows of the HVAC unit. He was wearing a tuxedo, black on black, no tie. He looked like a dark prince of the city, dangerous and beautiful. "How did you get up here?" Emily asked, her voice breaking. "I told you," Vincent said, walking toward her slowly. "I have been watching." He stopped a few feet away. The wind ruffled his dark hair, but his eyes were steady anchors in the storm of her panic. "You looked inside the desk," he stated. It wasn't a question. Emily slumped against the railing, the fight draining out of her. "Yes, and a gun," she choked out, tears finally spilling over. "Photos of me from months ago, pills with my name on them." Vincent's expression darkened, a flash of pure, terrifying rage crossing his face before he suppressed it. "He plans to keep you sedated." "A docile wife." "I do not know what to do," Emily sobbed, sliding down the railing until she was crouching on the cold concrete. "He owns my father. He owns my family. If I leave, he will destroy everything." Vincent moved then, closing the distance between them. He crouched down in front of her, heedless of his expensive suit. "Look at me. Emily." She raised her tear-streaked face. I can protect you, he said, his voice rough with intensity. I can make the debt disappear. I can make him disappear, but I cannot do it unless you ask me to. I cannot start a war for a woman who walks willingly down the aisle. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for me? Because I know what it is like to be trapped, Vincent said softly. And because from the moment I saw you in that bar, I knew you did not belong to him. I am scared, she confessed, her voice barely audible over the wind. He's so powerful. He is a man, Vincent said, and men bleed. The vulnerability in the air was thick, almost suffocating. They were two people from different worlds, huddled together on a rooftop while the city ignored them. Emily reached out, her hand trembling as she moved toward him. She needed to know he was real. She needed an anchor. As her fingers brushed the back of his hand, Vincent turned his palm upward. He caught her hand, but he did not grip it. Instead, he ran his thumb slowly across her knuckles. The touch was light, reverent, but the heat behind it seared through her skin. It was a touch that promised violence to the world and tenderness to her. She looked into his eyes and saw her reflection there, not as a victim, but as something precious. Vincent, she breathed, her heart aching with a sudden, fierce longing. Tell me to take you, he whispered, leaning closer. Say the word, and we leave right now. My car is downstairs. Emily parted her lips to speak, to say yes, to run into the fire with him. Emily! The name cracked through the air like a gunshot. Emily flinched violently, ripping her hand away from Vincent as she scrambled to stand up. Alexander stood by the roof access door. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes bulging. Two of his personal security guards stood behind him. Get away from her, Alexander snarled. Striding across the roof, Vincent stood up slowly, placing himself between Emily and Alexander. His posture shifted instantly, shoulders squared, hands loose at his sides, ready for violence. Touch her, Voss, and you lose the hand, Vincent said, his voice deadly calm. Alexander stopped, sneering. Moretti. I should have known a gutter rat like you would be sniffing around. He looked past Vincent at Emily. Get over here. Emily, now. She's not going with you, Vincent said. She is my fiancée. Alexander spat. And unless you want to start a war right here, right now, on top of a hotel filled with witnesses, you will step aside. Vincent did not move. He looked back at Emily. It was a silent question. Do I kill them? Emily looked at the guards. She looked at Alexander's manic rage. If Vincent fought them here, someone would die. Maybe Vincent. She couldn't let that happen. Not for her. Vincent, don't, she whispered. Vincent's jaw tightened. Emily. I have to go, she said, tears streaming down her face again. She stepped around Vincent, her heart shattering in her chest. She walked toward Alexander, head bowed. Alexander grabbed her arm roughly, yanking her to his side. He glared at Vincent with triumph. Stay away from what is mine. Moretti, Alexander warned. Next time, I won't be so polite. He dragged Emily toward the door. She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes locking with Vincent's one last time. He stood alone on the windy rooftop, his hands clenched into fists, watching her being taken away into the dark. He looked like a man who had just decided that peace was no longer an option. The penthouse was no longer a home. If it had ever been one, it was a glass cage suspended 40 stories above the city, hermetically sealed against the world below, for 3 days. Emily Monroe had not felt the wind on her face or heard a voice that wasn't employed by Alexander Voss. For your safety, Alexander had said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm as he locked the private elevator access code. Until you learn that running away is not only foolish, but dangerous. There are wolves out there. Emily, I am the only one who can keep them at bay. He had taken her phone, her laptop, and her keys. He had left her with nothing but the expensive clothes in the closet and the silent, looming presence of his security guards who stood outside the front door. But Alexander had made one mistake. He was arrogant. He assumed that because he had confiscated her personal phone, she was cut off. He did not know about the burner phone Vincent had slipped into her palm during the chaotic moment on the rooftop, just seconds before Alexander had dragged her away. It was a sleek, disposable device, smaller than a compact mirror, and she had kept it taped to the underside of the marble vanity in the master bathroom, the one room Alexander rarely entered. On the third night, while the rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the device vibrated against the cold stone. Emily locked the bathroom door and retrieved it, her hands trembling. There was a single message glowing on the tiny screen. "When you are ready to run, I will be there." There was no signature, but she knew. She could almost hear his voice, the deep, gravelly timbre that had promised protection when everyone else offered her up as collateral. Emily stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was pale, her eyes rimmed with dark circles, her collarbones protruding sharply against the silk of the robe Alexander had forced her to wear. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. "I am ready," she whispered to the empty room. She didn't send a reply. She didn't know if it was safe, but the message shifted something inside her. It was an anchor in the storm. She spent the next hour sitting on the bathroom floor, a notepad balanced on her knees. If she left, she might never come back. If she left, Alexander would unleash his wrath on her family. But if she stayed, she would cease to exist. She would become Elena Rostova, a memory, a rumor, a tragedy. She wrote 2 letters. The first was to her younger sister, Chloe. "Do not let father sell you too," she wrote, the ink blotting with her tears. "Be smarter than I was. Run before they put a price tag on you." The second was to her mother. It was shorter, colder. "You watched me drowning and told me to smile because the water was expensive. I hope the debt was worth your daughter." She left the letters on the pillow of the bed she had been forced to share with Alexander's scent, though thankfully he had been sleeping in the guest wing to punish her with isolation. The storm outside was intensifying. Thunder rattled the heavy glass panes, and lightning fractured the sky in jagged bursts of white. It was perfect. The noise would cover her movements. The chaos was her cover. Emily dressed in the darkest clothes she could find, black leggings and a cashmere sweater. She didn't put on shoes. The click of heels on the marble floors would alert the guards. She had to be silent. She moved to the service entrance in the kitchen. It was used by the catering staff and cleaners, usually locked from the outside, but earlier that day, she had jammed a small silver spoon into the latch mechanism while the maid was distracted. It was a desperate, flimsy hope, but it was all she had. She pressed the handle. It gave way with a soft click. Emily slipped into the service corridor. It was cold, smelling of bleach and concrete. She bypassed the main elevator, which required a key card, and found the freight elevator. It was slow, clanking and groaning as it descended, and every second felt like an hour. She huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped around herself, waiting for the doors to open and Alexander to be standing there with that dead-eyed smile. But when the doors opened, she was in the loading bay. It was empty, save for a few dumpsters and the howling wind blowing rain through the open garage gate. She ran. She burst out into the alleyway, the freezing rain instantly soaking her to the bone. The pavement was rough and icy against her bare feet, tearing at her skin. But she didn't feel the pain. She felt only the terror of being hunted. She ran toward the main street, blinded by the downpour, her hair plastered to her face. Cars hissed by, their headlights blurring in the deluge. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to put distance between herself and the tower that scraped the sky behind her. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness, blindingly bright. A black sedan swerved out of the traffic, tires screeching on the wet asphalt as it pulled up onto the curb right in front of her. Emily froze, her breath hitching in a sob. Alexander found her. It was over. The rear door flew open. A man stepped out, ignoring the rain that immediately soaked his suit. He was tall, broad, and moved with a terrifying purpose. "Emily!" It wasn't Alexander. The relief was so violent it nearly knocked her over. She stumbled forward, her legs finally giving out. Vincent caught her before she hit the ground. His arms were solid iron around her, holding her up when she could no longer stand. She collapsed against his chest, shivering uncontrollably, gasping for air that wouldn't fill her lungs. "I have you," he growled against her ear, his hand gripping the back of her head, pressing her face into his coat. "I have you. You are safe now." He didn't wait. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing and deposited her into the leather back seat of the car. He climbed in beside her, slamming the door against the storm. "Drive," Vincent ordered the driver, his voice hard. The car peeled away, merging back into the traffic, disappearing into the anonymity of the city rain. Inside, it was warm. Vincent stripped off his soaking wet jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, her hands clutching the lapels of his coat as if it were a lifeline. "You came," she whispered, her voice broken. "How did you know?" "I told you," Vincent said, his eyes scanning her face for injuries, dark with worry. "I have been waiting every night. I knew you would run. I just needed to be close enough to catch you." He reached down and saw her feet, bare, bleeding, and blue with cold. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He didn't say a word about her foolishness. He simply reached into a compartment, pulled out a clean towel, and gently lifted her feet into his lap to dry them. The intimacy of the act, a mafia boss kneeling in a moving car to tend to her wounds, broke the dam inside her. Emily began to cry. Not the polite, silent tears she had shed for weeks, but deep, ugly sobs of exhaustion and release. Vincent didn't tell her to stop. He moved to the seat beside her and pulled her into his arms, letting her ruin his shirt with her tears, his hand stroking her wet hair over and over again. "Let it go, Emily," he murmured. "You're out. He cannot touch you here." The drive took 2 hours. They left the city behind, the skyscrapers giving way to suburbs, then to the winding, unlit roads of the countryside. The rain did not let up, hammering against the roof of the car like a drum. When the car finally slowed, they were deep in the woods, approaching a heavy iron gate that opened automatically. The estate was secluded, a sprawling stone house that looked more like a fortress than a home, surrounded by dense forest. Men with grim faces and earpieces stood at the perimeter, nodding to Vincent as the car passed. "Where are we?" Emily asked, her voice hoarse. "A safe house," Vincent said. "One of the few places Alexander Voss does not know exists. You will be safe here." He led her inside. The house was warm, smelling of wood smoke and cedar. It was masculine and sparse, filled with heavy, dark furniture and rugs. "My housekeeper will find you something dry to wear," Vincent said, leading her up the wide staircase. "You need a hot shower and sleep." He brought her to the master bedroom at the end of the hall. It was a massive room with a fireplace that was already crackling with warmth, a king-sized bed, and heavy curtains drawn tight against the night. "This is your room," he said. Emily looked around, hugging his coat tighter around herself. "Where will you sleep?" "I will take the couch downstairs," Vincent said, moving to check the lock on the window. "No," she said quickly. "I mean, is that safe? What if he finds us?" Vincent turned to her. His eyes were tired but fierce. "There are 12 armed men patrolling the grounds, Emily, and I will be right at the bottom of the stairs. If anyone wants to get to you, they have to go through me, and I promise you, they will not make it." He hesitated, then stepped closer, reaching out to brush a damp strand of hair from her forehead. "Sleep. You are free." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Emily showered, scrubbing the feeling of the penthouse off her skin until she was raw. She put on the oversized flannel shirt the housekeeper had left for her, which smelled faintly of detergent and lavender. She climbed into the massive bed, pulling the duvet up to her chin, but sleep did not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Alexander's face. She heard the click of the lock. She heard the thunder and thought it was a gunshot. The silence of the large room was heavy, pressing down on her. She felt exposed, alone. She lay there for 2 hours, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. Her heart rate refusing to slow down. She couldn't do it. She couldn't be alone in the dark. Emily threw the covers back and padded barefoot out of the room. The hallway was dark. She walked down the stairs, the wood smooth and warm under her feet. The living room was dimly lit by the dying embers of the fireplace. Vincent was lying on the large leather sofa, one arm thrown over his eyes, his long legs cramped against the armrest. His gun lay on the coffee table within arm's reach. He wasn't asleep. As soon as she stepped off the last stair, he sat up, his hand hovering over the weapon before he recognized her. "Emily?" His voice was rough with sleep and alertness. "What is wrong? Did you hear something?" "No," she whispered, hugging her arms. I can't sleep." Vincent exhaled, scrubbing a hand down his face. He looked exhausted, the stress of the rescue finally showing in the lines around his eyes. "It is the adrenaline. It will fade. I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It is too quiet upstairs. Every shadow looks like him." She took a hesitant step toward the couch. "Can I just lie here for a while?" she asked. "I don't want to be alone." Vincent went still. He looked at her, standing there in the oversized shirt, her hair damp and wild, her eyes wide with trauma. He looked at the narrow space on the couch, then back at her. "Emily," he warned, his voice low. "I am a man, not a saint. You are in a vulnerable state. I trust you," she said simply. "I don't trust the dark. Please." He stared at her for a long moment, a war fighting behind his eyes. Then, with a resigned sigh, he shifted, moving to the very edge of the sectional sofa to make room against the back cushions. "Come here," he said quietly. Emily moved quickly, climbing onto the sofa. She lay down on the inside, curling her legs up, her back pressed against the leather cushions. Vincent lay back down on the edge, keeping a distinct distance between them. "Try to sleep," he murmured, closing his eyes. For a long time, there was only the sound of the rain and the crackle of the fire, but the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Emily could feel the heat radiating from his body, a solid, reassuring presence just inches away. She shifted, trying to get comfortable, but the fear was still a cold knot in her stomach. She needed to feel that he was real. She needed to know the barrier between her and the world was solid. She rolled over. They were face to face now, separated by mere inches of darkness. Vincent's eyes were open, watching her. They were dark pools, unreadable and intense. "Better?" he asked softly. "A little," she whispered. She shifted again, and her movement brought her closer. Her breath, warm and soft, brushed against the hollow of his throat. Vincent flinched, his jaw clenched tight, the muscles jumping under the skin. His hand, which had been resting on his stomach, curled into a fist. He was a man holding back a landslide. "Vincent?" she whispered, sensing the shift in him. "Go to sleep, Emily," he rasped, his voice strained, sounding like gravel grinding together. "Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I am your savior," he said, his eyes burning into hers. "I am not a good man. You need to remember that." "You are good to me," she countered. She reached out, her hand hovering in the space between them, then settled it tentatively on his chest, right over his heart. It was beating fast, a heavy, rhythmic thudding that betrayed his calm exterior. Vincent stopped breathing for a second. He looked down at her hand, small and pale against his black t-shirt, then back up to her eyes. He didn't push her away. He didn't pull her closer. He just lay there, agonizingly still, letting her touch him, letting her anchor herself to him. "You are safe," he repeated, the words sounding more like a vow to himself than to her. "I won't let anything hurt you, not even me." Emily closed her eyes, her hand rising and falling with his breath. For the first time in weeks, the cold in her bones began to thaw. She fell asleep to the sound of his heartbeat, unaware of the man lying awake in the dark, watching over her as if she were the only holy thing left in a godless world. Time at the estate did not pass in hours or minutes. It passed in the slow, rhythmic healing of wounds that could not be seen. The world outside, the debts, the threats, the suffocating expectations of Emily's family, felt like a nightmare from a previous life. Here, hidden deep within the embrace of the forest, the air was clean, and the silence was not heavy. It was peaceful. For the first few days, Emily mostly slept. Her body, finally released from the adrenaline of survival mode, crashed hard. Vincent did not disturb her. He left trays of food outside her door, warm soups, fresh bread, fruit, and retreated, letting her learn the shape of safety on her own terms. But by the fourth day, the restlessness set in. Emily was not a woman who could sit idle while a storm gathered on the horizon. She found Vincent in the backyard, near the edge of the woods, firing a handgun at a target pinned to an old oak tree. The sound was deafening, cracking through the morning mist. Emily flinched with each shot, but she did not turn away. She watched the way his back muscles shifted under his shirt, the absolute stillness of his body before he pulled the trigger, and the controlled exhale that followed. He knew she was there. He didn't turn around, but he lowered the weapon, engaging the safety with a practiced click. "You are up early," Vincent said, his voice rough with the morning chill. "I cannot sleep anymore," Emily said, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. She walked across the damp grass until she was standing a few feet away. She looked at the target. 3 shots, all clustered in the center, destroying the bullseye. "I want you to teach me." Vincent turned then, his dark brows pulling together. "Teach you what?" "To do that," she said, nodding at the gun. "To not be helpless. Alexander treated me like a doll. My father treated me like currency. I am tired of being something that things happen to. I want to be the one who decides." Vincent studied her face for a long moment. He was looking for fear, for hesitation. He found neither. "It is not a toy, Emily," he said seriously. "Once you pick it up, you change. You acknowledge that violence is an option." "Violence is already in my life, Vincent," she countered softly. "I just want to be on the other end of it for once." He stared at her, then gave a sharp, decisive nod. "Okay." He didn't hand her the gun immediately. He spent the first hour teaching her how to stand. He moved around her, his voice low and instructive. "Widen your stance. You are too stiff," he said. "If you are stiff, the recoil will knock you off balance. You have to be rooted, like a tree." He stepped in close, his chest brushing her back. Emily's breath hitched. He reached around her, his large hands settling on her hips to adjust her angle. The touch was clinical, purely instructional, yet the heat of his palms seeped through her clothes, branding her. "Here," he murmured, his mouth close to her ear. "Center of gravity low. Lean into it slightly." He placed the weapon in her hand. It was heavier than she expected, cold steel that warmed quickly against her skin. He covered her hands with his, guiding her grip. "Do not close your eyes," he instructed. "Look at what you are hitting. Take a breath. Hold it. Squeeze. Do not pull." Emily fired. The recoil jerked her arms up, the sound shocking her system. The bullet went wide, burying itself in the dirt. "Again," Vincent said, his voice steady against her shoulder. They spent hours there. By noon, her arms ached and her ears rang. But she had hit the paper target. Vincent didn't praise her excessively, he simply nodded, a look of quiet respect in his eyes that meant more than any applause. "You are a quick learner," he said as they walked back to the house. "I have a good teacher," she replied. "I hope you never have to use it," Vincent said, his tone darkening. "But if you do, hesitate and you die. That is the only rule." The training became their routine. Mornings were for shooting. Afternoons were for situational awareness. Vincent taught her how to enter a room, how to check for exits, how to spot a tail in a reflection. He was dismantling the naive girl she had been and rebuilding her with steel in her spine. But the evenings were different. The evenings were soft. They fell into a domestic rhythm that felt dangerous in its intimacy. They cooked together in the large, industrial kitchen. Emily chopped vegetables while Vincent grilled steaks, moving around each other with a fluidity that usually took years to develop. One night, a week into her stay, they were sitting in the living room by the fire. Outside, the wind was howling, but inside, the firelight cast a warm, golden glow over the room. Vincent was nursing a glass of whiskey, his hand resting on his knee. Emily noticed the discoloration on his knuckles, bruises that were turning a sickly shade of yellow and purple. "Does it hurt?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Vincent looked down at his hand, flexing the fingers slowly. I don't feel it anymore. What happened? A disagreement with an associate who thought loyalty was optional, Vincent said vaguely. He looked at her, his eyes softening. Occupational hazard. Emily reached out, her fingers hovering over his battered hand before gently touching the skin. You take so much pain for everyone else. It is the cost of doing business. He shrugged. Then, his gaze dropped to her legs, curled under her on the sofa, specifically to the thin white scar running down her left shin, visible where her pajama pants had ridden up. And that? Emily instinctively pulled the fabric down, but then stopped. She didn't want to hide from him. I was 7, she said, a faint smile touching her lips. I was trying to climb the trellis to the second-floor balcony. I wanted to see if I could see the ocean from the roof. Did you make it? Vincent asked, a smirk playing on his lips. No. The trellis snapped. I fell 10 feet into the rose bushes. She laughed softly. My mother was furious, not because I was hurt, but because I ruined the roses. She told the doctor to stitch it quickly so we could get back to the garden party. Vincent's smile faded. A shadow passed over his face, that same protective rage she had seen on the rooftop. She should have held you, Vincent said, his voice low and fierce. She should have been scared she lost you. That is not who the Monroes are, Emily said quietly. Appearance first, affection if there is time. I would have caught you, Vincent said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Emily looked at him, her heart squeezing in her chest. I know. I never had anyone to catch me, Vincent admitted, staring into the fire. My brother? He was the soft one, the good one. I was the shield. When he died, I realized that shields don't get to be soft. They just get hit. You are not just a shield, Vincent, Emily whispered. You are a man. You are allowed to hurt. Vincent looked at her then, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. It was the look of a man who had spent a lifetime walking through fire, finally seeing a glimpse of water. The next morning, the air in the house had shifted. The tension that had been simmering between them, the stolen glances, the accidental touches, felt like it was reaching a boiling point. Emily woke up early. The sun was just cresting over the tree line, flooding the kitchen with pale, winter light. She showered and, feeling a sudden burst of boldness, put on the white silk robe she had found in the guest wardrobe. It was elegant, flowing like water over her skin, tying at the waist but leaving the curve of her neck exposed. She walked into the kitchen barefoot, the stone floor cool against her skin. She started the coffee machine, the scent of brewing Arabica filling the air. She was humming softly, a melody she hadn't thought of in years, feeling a sense of lightness she hadn't realized she was capable of. She didn't hear him come in. She turned to get a mug from the cupboard and froze. Vincent was standing in the doorway. He was dressed in dark jeans and a gray t-shirt that stretched tight across his chest. He had stopped dead in his tracks, his hand still resting on the doorframe. He was staring at her. His gaze started at her bare feet, traveled up the drape of the white silk, and landed on her face. His expression was not the guarded mask he usually wore. I was stunned. Hunger, raw and undisguised, darkened his eyes, turning the irises to black obsidian. "Good morning," Emily said, her voice breathless. Vincent didn't answer. He pushed off the doorframe and walked toward her. He moved differently today, not like a soldier, but like a man drawn by a force he couldn't resist. He stopped inches from her. The counter was pressing into Emily's lower back, trapping her, but she had no desire to escape. "Emily," he said, his voice a rough whisper that vibrated in her chest. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly. He brushed a lock of damp hair away from her shoulder, his fingers trailing fire down the sensitive skin of her neck. "You have no idea," he murmured, shaking his head slightly as if in disbelief. "You have no idea what you do to me." "Tell me," she challenged softly, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I walk into this room," Vincent said, stepping closer until their bodies were almost touching. "And I see you standing there in the sunlight, and I forget that there is a war outside. I forget that I am a killer. All I can think about is how much I want to keep you here. Forever." Emily let out a shaky breath. She raised her hand, placing it flat against the center of his chest. She could feel his heart beating just as fast as hers, a chaotic, thundering drum. "Then keep me," she whispered. Vincent made a sound low in his throat, a growl of surrender. He leaned down and captured her mouth. The kiss was not tentative. It was deep, slow, and devastating. It tasted of coffee and longing. It was the collision of two souls who had been orbiting each other in the dark, finally crashing together. Vincent's mouth was hot and firm, moving against hers with a desperate hunger that made her knees weak. Emily gasped, opening for him, and he deepened the kiss, his tongue sweeping against hers, claiming her. He gripped her waist, his large hands spanning her ribs, and effortlessly lifted her onto the kitchen counter. Emily wrapped her legs around him, pulling him closer, needing to eliminate every inch of space between them. He moved between her knees, pressing flush against her. He broke the kiss to bury his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent. "Emily." He groaned against her skin. "God, Emily." He kissed the sensitive spot below her ear, his hands moving up to cup her face, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones as if she were made of fragile glass. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, asking a silent question, offering her everything he had. He leaned in again, kissing her with more urgency, his hips pressing against hers, and then, suddenly, panic flared in Emily's chest. It wasn't him. It was the feeling of being overwhelmed, of losing control. The ghost of Alexander's possession, of being owned, flashed through her mind. She stiffened. She pulled back sharply, her hands pushing against his shoulders. "Wait!" she gasped. Vincent stopped instantly. He didn't try to persuade her. He didn't groan in frustration. He froze, his body rigid, his eyes locking onto hers with intense focus. "I'm sorry," Emily stammered, looking down, shame heating her cheeks. I can't. I'm not ready for everything, not yet. It is too much." She waited for the anger. She waited for the rejection instead. She felt a gentle touch on her chin. Vincent tilted her head up until she was looking at him again. His eyes were clear. There was no anger, only patience. Infinite, unwavering patience. "You never have to apologize for saying no," Vincent said firmly. "Not to me. Never to me." He brushed his thumb along her bottom lip, which was swollen from his kiss. "I am a patient man. Emily," he whispered, "I have waited my whole life for something real. I can wait a little longer for you." He kissed her forehead, a chaste, reverent seal of his promise, and stepped back, giving her space. He picked up his coffee mug, his hand steady, though his eyes still burned. "I have to go into the city today," he said, his voice returning to its usual calm cadence, though it was a shade deeper than before. "I need to meet with some contacts, see if we can find out what move Voss is making next. I will be back by nightfall." "Is it safe?" Emily asked, pulling her robe tighter, missing his warmth immediately. "Safer than staying blind," he said. "Stay inside. The guards are posted. Do not open the gate for anyone but me." He looked at her one last time, searing the image of her into his mind, before turning and walking out the door. The day dragged on without him. The house, which had felt like a sanctuary, felt empty and cavernous. Emily practiced her dry fire drills in the living room, trying to focus, but her mind kept drifting back to the kitchen, to the taste of him, to the way he had stopped the moment she asked. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised purple, heavy clouds rolling in over the treetops. At the perimeter of the estate, the shift change was happening. One of the guards, a man named Marcus who had been with Vincent for 2 years, walked toward the security booth at the main gate. He checked his phone. A bank notification flashed on the screen. Deposit received, $2 million. Marcus swallowed hard. He liked Vincent, but he had a sick mother and a gambling debt that was going to get his legs broken. Alexander Voss had offered him a way out. He disabled the silent alarm. Down the road, hidden by the curve of the forest, 3 black SUVs idled. As the gate clicked and began to swing open, the engines roared to life. Emily was in the library when she heard the sound. It wasn't the sound of Vincent's sports car. It was the heavy crunch of multiple tires on gravel. She stood up, her heart leaping into her throat. She moved to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds. 3 unfamiliar cars were tearing up the driveway. "No," she whispered. She turned to run, to grab the gun Vincent had given her, but the front door exploded inward with a deafening crash. Men in tactical gear poured into the hallway. "Clear the ground floor!" a voice shouted. Emily scrambled backward, knocking over a lamp. She sprinted for the back door, but before she could reach the kitchen, a figure stepped out from the dining room shadows. It was Alexander. He looked immaculate in a charcoal suit, untouched by the violence his men were inflicting on Vincent's loyal guards outside. He held a taser in his hand, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Did you really think," Alexander said smoothly, "that you could hide from me?" Emily lunged for the knife block on the counter, desperation fueling her. She grabbed a chef's knife, spinning around to face him. "Stay back!" Alexander laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Put it down, Emily, before you hurt yourself." "I would rather die than go back with you," she spat, gripping the handle until her knuckles turned white. "That can be arranged," Alexander said, "but not today." He nodded to someone behind her. Emily turned, but it was too late. The prongs of a taser hit her back. The world dissolved into white-hot pain, her muscles locking up, the knife clattering to the floor. She collapsed, darkness rushing up to meet her. The last thing she felt was Alexander's polished shoe nudging her hand aside. It was nearly midnight when Vincent returned. He knew something was wrong before he even saw the house. The gate was standing wide open. The security booth was empty. Ice flooded his veins. He slammed on the accelerator, the car fishtailing on the gravel as he roared up the driveway. He didn't bother parking. He threw the car into park while it was still rolling and bailed out, his gun drawn. "Emily!" he screamed, his voice tearing through the silence of the night. There was no answer. He saw the bodies of his men first, 2 by the front steps. He checked them. Dead. Professional hits. He took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the house. "Emily!" The foyer was a wreck. The front door was splintered. A lamp lay shattered on the floor. He moved through the house like a wraith, clearing room after room, his heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against his ribs. Please let her be hiding. Please let her be safe. He reached the kitchen. The signs of struggle were clear. The knife on the floor, the scuff marks, but she was gone. Vincent stood in the center of the kitchen, the place where only that morning he had held her and promised her safety. The smell of her, lavender and fear, still lingered faintly in the air. He saw something white on the floor near the island. He walked over and knelt down. It was the silk sash from her robe. It had been torn off in the struggle. Vincent picked it up. The silk was soft against his calloused, blood-stained fingers. He brought it to his face, inhaling sharply. A primal, guttural roar built in his chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and rage. He stood up and slammed his fist into the granite countertop, the force of the blow cracking the stone. He pulled his phone out, his hand shaking with the need to kill. He dialed his second in command. "Get everyone," Vincent said, his voice devoid of humanity. It was the voice of the devil himself. "Wake them up, call in every favor, empty the accounts." "Boss?" the voice on the other end asked, terrified. "What is the order?" Vincent looked at the white sash in his hand, his eyes burning with a cold, blue fire. "Burn it down," Vincent whispered. "We are going to burn the whole city down until I find her." He hung up and walked out into the night, the sash tied around his wrist like a favor for a war that had just begun. The room they held her in was not a bedroom. It was a vault wrapped in velvet. The Voss family compound sat on the edge of the cliffs, a fortress of gray stone and iron gates that overlooked the churning ocean. Inside, the air was stale, recycled through vents that hummed with a low, oppressive drone. Emily sat on the edge of the 4-poster bed, her hands resting limply in her lap. She had stopped crying hours ago. Tears required hope, and she had none left. The wedding, originally scheduled for a month from now, had been moved. It was happening tomorrow morning at dawn. Alexander had decided that waiting was a liability. He wanted the contract signed, the vows spoken, and the property secured before anyone could breathe a word of dissent. The door clicked. The sound was heavy, the slide of a deadbolt that cost more than most people's homes. Alexander entered. He was dressed in a silk robe, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. He looked relaxed, victorious. He did not look like a man who had kidnapped a woman from a safe house. He looked like a man who had simply retrieved a wayward pet. "You are not sleeping," Alexander observed, taking a sip of his drink. "You need your rest. Emily, you want to look beautiful for our guests." Emily did not look up. She stared at a pattern in the Persian rug, a twisting vine that looked like a snake strangling a flower. "I will not say the vows," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "I will scream at the altar. I will tell everyone what you are." Alexander chuckled, a low sound that scraped against her nerves. "No, you won't, because if you do, your father goes to prison for embezzlement, and your sister—" Well, accidents happen to young girls in the city all the time. He walked over to the small desk in the corner and picked up a manila envelope. "Besides," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a mockingly sympathetic tone, "there is no one left to save you." Emily's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Alexander sighed, feigning regret. He tossed the envelope onto the bed next to her. "Your knight in shining armor." He tried to follow the transport van. It was messy. Emily's heart stopped. Her hands shook as she reached for the envelope. She didn't want to open it, but she couldn't stop herself. She slid the photograph out. It was a grainy image, taken in low light. It showed a car, Vincent's sleek black sports car, twisted around a telephone pole. Flames licking up the sides, and in the foreground, lying on the wet asphalt, was a man. He was face down, but the build was right, the dark hair was right, and the blood. There was so much blood. "He survived the crash long enough for my men to finish the job." Alexander lied smoothly. "He is dead. Emily. Burned to ash." The world went silent. The hum of the vents faded. The sound of the ocean outside vanished. All that remained was a high-pitched ringing in her ears and a hollow, crushing weight in her chest. Vincent, the man who had looked at her scars and called her strong. The man who had stopped when she asked him to stop. The man who had slept on the edge of a couch just to be near her in the dark. Dead. Because of her. "No," she whimpered, the sound breaking in her throat. "No, he isn't." "He is," Alexander said, leaning down to grip her chin, forcing her to look at him. "And now, it is just you and me, forever. So accept it, Emily. The rebellion is over." He let go of her face and walked to the door. "Get some sleep. The makeup team arrives at 4 o'clock. The lock clicked shut again. Emily curled onto her side, clutching the photo to her chest. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She simply broke. The fire that Vincent had ignited in her flickered and died, leaving only cold, gray ash. 5 miles away, in the basement of an abandoned textile factory, Vincent Moretti was very much alive. He was sitting on a metal crate, his shirt stripped off, while a field medic stitched a jagged gash across his ribs. He had not been in the car that crashed. That had been a decoy, driven by one of his lieutenants who had bailed out seconds before impact. But the firefight that followed had been real. Vincent hissed through his teeth as the needle pierced his skin. But he didn't tell the medic to stop. He stared at the map spread out on the table in front of him, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. "We have confirmed the location," Dante, his new second-in-command, said, pointing to the blueprint of the Voss compound. "They moved the ceremony to the private chapel on the grounds. It is a fortress. Vincent, high walls, armed security, only one road in." "We do not need the road," Vincent growled. He stood up, ignoring the medic's protest as he pulled a fresh black tactical shirt over his bandaged torso. "And we are not going for stealth." "The chapel is filled with civilians," Dante warned. "The families, the press. If we go heavy, it will be a massacre." "No civilians get hurt," Vincent ordered, buckling his holster. He checked the magazine of his handgun, the metallic click echoing in the concrete room. But anyone wearing a Voss security pin, they do not walk out. He looked at the men gathered in the room. There were 20 of them, loyal soldiers who had been with him since the beginning. They looked tired, battered, and ready to die for him. He told her I was dead, Vincent said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. He thinks he has broken her. He thinks he has won. He picked up a heavy assault rifle from the table and slung it over his shoulder. We're going to show Alexander Voss that ghosts do not stay buried, Vincent said. We leave in 10 minutes. Burn the gate. The dawn was gray and weeping. A light drizzle fell over the Voss estate, turning the stone chapel into a grim monolith against the cliffs. Inside, the air smelled of lilies and dread. The pews were filled with the city's elite, a sea of black suits and designer dresses, hushed whispers circulating about the suddenness of the ceremony. Emily stood in the vestibule. She wore a dress that cost $50,000. It was a masterpiece of lace and silk, fitted to perfection, with a long train that pooled around her like spilt milk. But to Emily, it was a shroud. Her father stood beside her. Richard Monroe looked pale, sweating in the cool air. He reached out to take her arm. "Emily," he whispered nervously. "Please, just get through this, for the family." Emily turned her head slowly to look at him. Her eyes were dull, void of light. "I do not have a family," she said, her voice dead. "I was sold by a stranger." Richard flinched, but the organ music swelled, signaling their cue. The doors opened. Emily walked. 1 step, 2 steps. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't look at the flowers. She looked straight ahead at the altar, where Alexander stood waiting. He looked triumphant, his chest puffed out, a smug smile plastered on his face as he watched his prize approach. Every step was a physical effort. Her body felt heavy, leaden. She imagined Vincent's body on the wet asphalt, cold and alone, and a sob threatened to climb up her throat. She swallowed it down. She would not give Alexander the satisfaction of her tears. Not today. She reached the altar. Alexander stepped forward, taking her cold hand in his. His grip was tight, possessive. "You look breathtaking," he whispered, a threat disguised as a compliment. The priest, an elderly man who looked as terrified of Alexander as everyone else, cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Emily stared at the priest's shoes. "Just breathe," she told herself. "Just survive. If there is anyone here," the priest continued, rushing through the words, "who has just cause why these two may not be joined together, speak now or forever hold your peace." It was a formality. No one ever spoke. Boom. The heavy oak doors at the back of the church didn't just open, they exploded inward. Wood splinters rained down onto the back pews as the lock shattered under the force of a battering ram. The entire congregation screamed and ducked. A chill wind swept into the church, extinguishing the candles along the aisle. Standing in the doorway, backlit by the gray morning light, was a silhouette, tall, broad, lethal. Vincent walked in. He was not wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing black tactical gear, dust on his boots, a bandage visible at his neck, and a gun in his right hand. Behind him, a wall of armed men fanned out, securing the perimeter, their weapons trained on Alexander's security guards who stood frozen in shock. Vincent strode down the center aisle. He did not run. He walked with the terrifying inevitability of a natural disaster. Alexander dropped Emily's hand. His face went white, then purple with rage. "You!" he screamed. "You're dead. I saw the car." Vincent didn't even look at Alexander. His eyes were locked on Emily. Emily stood frozen at the altar. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked. Sure, she was hallucinating, but he was there. He was real. He was breathing, battered and beautiful. "Vincent," she whispered, the name of a prayer. Vincent stopped 10 feet from the altar. He raised his gun, leveling it at Alexander's chest. The entire church held its breath. Then slowly, deliberately, he lowered the weapon to his side. He looked at Emily, his eyes blazing with a fire that could burn the world down. "She is not yours," Vincent growled, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "She never was." He took another step closer, ignoring the gasps of the crowd. "Marry me instead?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was broken by Alexander's shriek of fury. "Kill him!" Alexander shouted to his guards. "Kill them all!" Chaos erupted. Alexander's guards reached for their weapons, but Vincent's men were faster. A spray of warning shots shattered the stained glass windows above the altar, raining colored glass down like confetti. "Nobody moves!" Dante roared from the back, his team effectively neutralizing the room without a massacre. Emily didn't wait. She didn't care about the guns. She didn't care about the danger. She picked up her heavy skirts and ran. She practically threw herself off the altar steps, colliding with Vincent with enough force to knock the wind out of him. He dropped his gun to the floor, clattering loudly on the stone, and caught her. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet, crushing her against his tactical vest. "You're alive!" she sobbed, burying her face in his neck. "You're alive! You're alive! I told you!" Vincent rasped, burying his face in her hair, shaking with the force of his own relief. "I told you I would come. I told you I would be there." He set her down but didn't let her go. He framed her face with his hands, wiping away the tears with his thumbs. He looked at her as if she were the only person in the room. "I'm not letting you leave this church with him," Vincent said fiercely. "I'm not letting you leave with anyone but me." He turned his head, looking past her to the trembling priest. Alexander was cowering behind the altar. Realizing his men were outgunned and outmaneuvered, Vincent looked at the priest. His expression was hard, commanding, but his eyes were pleading. "Can you do it now?" Vincent asked. The priest blinked, clutching his Bible to his chest. Do what?" "Marry us," Vincent said. "Right now." "This is highly irregular," the priest stammered. There are procedures. The license. Vincent reached down and picked up his gun. He didn't point at the priest, he just held it at his side, a heavy reminder of the reality they were in. "Father," Vincent said, his voice calm but dangerous, "I have 20 men with automatic weapons outside. The woman I love is in a dress, and God is watching. I think we have everything we need." The priest looked at Alexander, who was fuming but helpless. He looked at the armed men lining the aisle. Then he looked at Emily. "Do you?" the priest asked her, his voice small. "Do you consent to this interruption?" Emily looked up at Vincent. She saw the blood on his bandage. She saw the dust of the battle he had fought to get to her. She saw the man who had taught her how to shoot, who had slept on the floor, who had treated her like a person instead of a possession. She smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached her eyes. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated rebellion. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Yes, I consent." Vincent took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused, and warm. It was the only safety she had ever known. Then the priest swallowed hard, opening his book with trembling hands. "We shall skip to the vows." The scene was surreal. Broken glass littered the floor. Armed men stood guard by the statues of the saints. Alexander's mother had fainted in the front row, but in the center of the storm, there was only quiet. "Do you, Vincent Moretti," the priest asked, rushing the words, "take this woman to be your wedded wife?" Vincent didn't look at the priest. He looked at Emily, his thumb tracing the pulse point on her wrist. "I do," Vincent said, "with everything I have. And do you, Emily Monroe?" Emily squeezed Vincent's hand tight, anchoring herself to him. She looked at her father, cowering in the pew. She looked at Alexander, defeated and hateful. Then she looked at her husband. "I do," she said, and there was fire in her voice. Then the priest made the sign of the cross, looking like he wanted to faint. "I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Vincent didn't hesitate. He pulled her flush against him, one hand tangling in her hair, the other gripping her waist. He kissed her, and it wasn't a polite wedding kiss. It was a claim. It was deep, passionate, and seared with the promise of a future they would fight for. when they broke apart, breathless. Vincent grabbed his gun with one hand and Emily's hand with the other. "Let's go home," he said. Emily kicked off her high heels, standing barefoot on the cold stone. She gathered her silk train in her free hand and gripped Vincent's fingers tight. "Yes," she said. "Let's go." They walked back up the aisle together, stepping over the broken wood of the doors, walking out of the prison and into the gray, rainy morning as husband and wife. The drive back to the estate was silent, but it was not the heavy, suffocating silence of the ride to the church. It was a silence filled with adrenaline, slowly bleeding out, replaced by a profound, vibrating awareness of the person sitting in the passenger seat. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean, the wet asphalt reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. When they pulled up to the heavy iron gates, the damage from the previous night's attack was already being repaired. New guards, hand-picked and heavily armed, stood at the perimeter. They nodded as Vincent's car passed, a silent acknowledgement of the king returning with his queen. Vincent parked the car and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet was deafening. He didn't move immediately. He just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, his chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. He looked over at Emily. She was still wearing the wedding dress, though the hem was stained with mud and the lace was torn where she had run. She looked like a fallen angel who had fought her way out of hell. "We are home," Vincent said, his voice rough. Emily looked at the stone house. It wasn't just a safe house anymore. It was the place where she had learned to breathe. "Home," she repeated, testing the weight of the word. Vincent got out and walked around to her side. He opened the door and offered her his hand. When she took it, he didn't pull her up. He leaned down, sweeping her into his arms, lifting her effortlessly against his chest. "Vincent, I can walk," she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "I know," he said, carrying her up the steps, "but I am never taking the chance of you stumbling again." He carried her through the repaired front door, up the wide staircase, and into the master bedroom. The fire was already lit, casting a warm, flickering glow over the room. He set her down gently beside the bed, but he didn't step away. The energy in the room shifted. The danger of the morning, the violence of the church, the chaos of the escape, it all narrowed down to this single point. Two people, standing in the dark, surviving together. Vincent reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and touched the veil that still hung from her hair. He pulled it free, letting it drift to the floor like a ghost. "You are beautiful," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "But I hate this dress. It belongs to the life you left behind." "Then take it off," Emily whispered. Vincent's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, his hands moving to the pearl buttons running down her back. He undid them slowly, one by one, his knuckles grazing her spine, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. The dress pooled at her feet, leaving her standing in the silk slip beneath. He pulled her against him, skin to skin, heart to heart. The kiss started slowly, a reverence, a question asked and answered. But then the dam broke, the fear of losing her, the rage of the last 24 hours, the months of longing, it all poured into the way he touched her. He kissed her deeply, drinking her in, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no air between them. They moved to the bed, the sheets cool against their heated skin. This was not a taking, it was a gift. Vincent worshipped her. His hands, rough and scarred from a lifetime of violence, were impossibly gentle as they traced the lines of her body. He kissed the hollow of her throat, the curve of her shoulder, the scar on her shin from the rose bush. He treated her body like it was the only holy ground left in the world. Emily met him with equal intensity. She ran her hands over the hard planes of his chest, feeling the ridge of old scars and the fresh bandage on his ribs. She kissed the bruise on his jaw. She pulled him down to her, needing his weight, needing his reality. "Emily." He groaned against her mouth, his voice wrecked. "I love you, God, I love you." The confession hung in the air, raw and absolute. They moved together in a rhythm that was as ancient as it was new. It was slow, agonizingly sweet, an exploration of souls that had finally found their matching piece. When she cried out his name, it wasn't in fear, but in release. And when he found his release, he buried his face in her neck, holding on to her as if she were the anchor, keeping him from drifting into the abyss. Later, the fire had died down to glowing embers. They lay tangled together under the heavy duvet, limbs intertwined. The storm outside had passed, leaving a deep, velvet silence. Emily traced the tattoo on Vincent's bicep, a black sword wrapped in vines. "I always felt invisible," she whispered into the dark. "In that big house, with all those people. I was just a ghost. My mother looked through me. My father looked at me and saw a price tag. I thought that was all love was, a transaction." Vincent tightened his arm around her, pulling her back against his chest. He kissed the top of her head. "That wasn't love. Emily, that was leverage. I know that now," she said softly. "Because of you." She turned in his arms to face him. "Tell me about the brother you lost. You mentioned him once." Vincent went still. He looked up at the ceiling, his expression guarding a deep, old pain. "Gabriel," he said, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. "He was 2 years younger. He wasn't like me. He didn't have a temper. He wanted to be an architect. He used to draw sketches of buildings on napkins." Vincent swallowed hard. "Our father, he was a hard man. He wanted soldiers, not artists. I took the beatings for Gabriel. I fought his fights in the schoolyard. I thought if I was violent enough for both of us, Gabriel could stay clean." "What happened?" Emily asked gently, her hand resting on his heart. "A rival family," Vincent said, his voice devoid of inflection, which was more terrifying than anger. "They wanted to send a message to my father. They didn't come for me. They knew I would fight back. They waited until Gabriel was walking home from a studio class. They took him." A tear slipped from the corner of his eye, disappearing into his hairline. "I found him too late," Vincent whispered. "After that, I stopped being a shield. I became a sword. I burned that rival family to the ground, every single one of them, but it didn't bring him back." He looked at Emily, his eyes shining in the low light. "I spent 10 years thinking I was broken," he said, "that I was just a weapon, until I walked into a bar and saw a woman wearing a diamond that looked like a shackle." Emily leaned up and kissed him, softly, tenderly, healing the boy who had lost his brother and the man who had blamed himself. "You are not a weapon, Vincent," she promised him. "You are my husband." Peace was a fragile thing, but they held on to it with both hands. For a week, the world was quiet. The police were investigating the church incident, but with Vincent's connections and the sheer chaos of the event, no charges had yet. They stayed at the estate, living in a bubble of domesticity. They cooked. They walked in the woods. They learned how to be a married couple without the threat of death hanging over breakfast. But Alexander Voss was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a narcissist who had been humiliated in front of the entire city. His empire was crumbling. Investors were pulling out. Rumors of his financial ruin were spreading, and he had one singular focus left: destroy the man who took his property and reclaim the woman who dared to run. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Vincent had gone to the edge of the property to inspect the new security sensors with Dante. Emily was in the library, reading a book by the window, a cup of tea cooling on the sill. She saw the glint of sunlight on metal in the tree line before she heard the engine. It wasn't a car. It was a tactical team moving on foot through the woods, bypassing the main gate entirely. Mercenaries. Emily didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She set her book down. She moved to the mahogany desk where Vincent kept a spare handgun in a biometric safe. She pressed her thumb to the scanner. Click, she pulled out the weapon. Checked the chamber just as Vincent had taught her. Look at what you are hitting. Take a breath. Squeeze. Glass shattered in the kitchen. "Clear the house!" a rough voice shouted. "Target is the female. Kill the male on sight." Emily slipped out of the library, moving silently in her socks. She didn't run upstairs. That was a trap. She moved toward the basement door. which connected to the underground garage. A mercenary turned the corner into the hallway. He was dressed in camouflage, holding a suppressed rifle. He saw her. He raised his weapon. Emily didn't hesitate. She raised the gun, exhaled, and fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. She missed his chest, but hit his shoulder. The mercenary yelled, spinning back behind the wall, dropping his rifle. "Contact, she's armed," he screamed into his radio. Emily sprinted for the basement door, locking it behind her and jamming a chair under the handle. She ran down the stairs, her heart hammering, but her mind crystal clear. Outside. The world exploded. Vincent had heard the gunshot. "Emily!" He roared, abandoning the sensor check. He didn't have his rifle. He had his sidearm and a knife. It was enough. He moved through the woods like a phantom. He took down the first mercenary from behind, snapping his neck before the man knew he was there. He took the man's rifle. Now it was a fair fight. Vincent breached the back door of the house, his vision tunneling. He moved through the kitchen, stepping over broken glass. 2 men came at him from the living room. Vincent dropped them with 2 precise shots to the chest, not breaking his stride. "Emily!" he shouted. "Basement!" Her voice came muffled through the floorboards. Vincent reached the basement door. Kicking the chair away, he ran down the stairs. The garage door was blown open. Sunlight streamed in, blinding him. Standing in the center of the garage, holding Emily by the hair with a gun pressed to her temple, was Alexander Voss. He looked deranged. His suit was dirty, his eyes wild, his face unshaven. He had lost everything, and he looked like a cornered rat. "Drop it!" Alexander screamed, pressing the barrel harder into Emily's skin. She whimpered, but her hands were clawing at his arm, fighting even now. Vincent froze. He raised his hands, the rifle hanging by its strap. "Let her go. Alexander," Vincent said, his voice deadly calm. "This is between us." "She is mine," Alexander spat. "I bought her. I own her." "You own nothing," Emily gasped, stomping her heel down onto Alexander's instep. Alexander howled in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. That was all Vincent needed. He didn't shoot. He lunged. He tackled Alexander, knocking him away from Emily. The gun skittered across the concrete floors, and Vincent was on top of him instantly. He didn't use technique. He used pure, unadulterated rage. He punched Alexander in the face. Hearing the nose crack, he punched him again and again. Alexander tried to fight back, flailing weakly, but he was a businessman fighting a warlord. Vincent dragged him up by his lapels and slammed him against the concrete pillar. He drew his knife, the blade flashing in the sunlight. He pressed the tip against Alexander's throat. "You touched her," Vincent snarled, his eyes black with murder. "I am going to carve you into pieces." "Do it," Alexander choked out, blood bubbling on his lips. "End it." Vincent pulled his arm back for the killing strike. "Vincent, no!" Emily's hand grabbed his wrist. Vincent froze. He looked at her. She was pale, shaking, her hair messy, but her eyes were clear. "Don't," she said. "He tried to kill you." Vincent breathed, his chest heaving. "He deserves to die." "He does," Emily agreed. "But if you kill him like this, in cold blood, you go back to being the weapon. You go back to the shadow." She stepped closer, her hand sliding down to cover his fist, holding the knife. "I don't want revenge, Vincent," she whispered. "I just want peace. I want us. If you kill him, he stays in our lives forever as a ghost. Let him rot in a cell. Let him be nothing." Vincent looked at Alexander, who was trembling with fear now that death was an inch away. He looked at Emily, who was offering him a way out of the darkness. Slowly, painfully, Vincent lowered the knife. He leaned in close to Alexander's ear. "You live because she allows it," Vincent whispered. "But if you ever speak her name again, there is no hole deep enough on this earth to hide you." Vincent released him, letting Alexander slump to the floor, broken and weeping. Sirens wailed in the distance. "My men called them," Vincent said, holstering his knife. "Tip-off about an armed assault and kidnapping." 10 minutes later, the police swarmed the estate. They found Alexander Voss in the garage, battered and defeated. They found the weapons, the mercenaries, and the evidence of the attack. As they cuffed Alexander, dragging him toward the squad car, he looked back one last time. Emily stood in the driveway, wrapped in Vincent's coat. She didn't look away. She watched him go, her face impassive. He was no longer a monster. He was just a sad, broken man who had tried to buy a soul and failed. 3 months later, the summer air was thick with the scent of jasmine and grilling meat. The patio of the estate was filled with laughter. It was a small gathering, just Dante, a few of Vincent's most trusted lieutenants, and, miraculously, Emily's sister, Chloe. Emily had driven into the city herself to pick her up, defying her parents' orders. Chloe sat at the table, laughing at a joke Dante had made, looking freer than she had in years. Vincent stood at the grill, flipping steaks. He looked different. The tension that used to carry in his shoulders was gone. He laughed more. He smiled easily. Emily walked out onto the porch, carrying a bowl of salad. She stopped, watching him. He sensed her, as he always did. He turned, his eyes lighting up the moment they landed on her. "Hungry?" he asked. "Starving," she smiled. The dinner lasted late into the night. Stories were told. Wine was poured. And for the first time in Emily's life, a dinner table felt like a place of nourishment rather than judgment. As the guests began to leave, drifting away into the guest house or driving down the long lane, the silence returned to the estate, but it was a warm silence. Emily sat on the porch swing, her legs tucked under her, watching the fireflies dance in the tall grass. The screen door creaked. Vincent stepped out, holding 2 glasses of wine. He handed one to her and sat down beside her, his arm naturally finding its way around her shoulders. "It was a good night," he said. "It was perfect," Emily agreed, leaning her head on his chest. They sat there for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead. "I was thinking," Emily said softly, "about that night in the bar, when you sat down next to me." "I remember," Vincent said. "You looked like you wanted to burn the world down but didn't have a match." Emily laughed softly. "I didn't." "You gave me the match." She turned her face up to his, tracing the line of his jaw. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For choosing me," she said. "You could have walked away. You could have left me on that rooftop. You could have stayed dead. But you chose me, over and over again." Vincent shook his head slowly. He took her hand, bringing it to his lips, kissing the ring finger where a simple gold band had replaced the diamond shackle. "No, Emily," he said, his voice rough with sincerity. "I didn't choose you like picking a flower. I fought for you. That is not the same as choosing." He looked deep into her eyes, the starlight reflecting in his dark gaze. "Choosing is a whim," he whispered. "Fighting, that is a vow. And I will fight for you every single day until the stars go dark." Emily smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "And I will fight for you. I know," he said. He leaned down, and she rose to meet him. They kissed under the vast, open sky, a mafia boss and a runaway bride, 2 survivors who had found peace in the middle of a war and created a love that was dangerous, beautiful, and entirely their own. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey taking Emily and Vincent from that cold dining room to the warmth of this final porch scene. I hope you enjoyed the twists, the tension, and the romance. I would love to know, where are you listening from right now? Are you in a busy city like Emily? Or somewhere quiet like the estate? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more emotional, intense tales of love and danger, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Share your thoughts on the ending. Did Emily make the right choice by sparing Alexander? I read every comment and love hearing your perspective. Until next time.